Hey, what's up everybody? So it's springtime and I desperately want to start using my back patio more. But to do that, really I need to freshen it up a little bit. So I've had this idea bouncing around in my head for building a coffee table as a focal point that has a succulent planter built straight into the middle of it. So needless to say, I was stoked at the opportunity to partner with Home Depot and Scott's Miracle Gro to build this coffee table. I'm using Redwood Lumber from Home Depot, and then I'm using the Miracle Gro soil and succulent food to bring this whole idea to life. So come on along, let's get building. All right, so for this build, I'm gonna be using nothing but Redwood Lumber that I picked up from the Home Depot. The stuff is great for outdoor projects because it's gonna be naturally rot resistant, insect resistant, and water resistant. So it's a perfect project wood for anything that you're doing outdoors. So I'm gonna break all these down. I've got 3 2x4s and then I picked up 7 1 3/8 inch square lumber. Next up, you're gonna see a cut list. Now this is where you can pause, take notes, screenshot, take a mental picture, do whatever you gotta do, but these are all the cuts that you're gonna be needing for the different pieces to build this coffee table. And next up, I'm gonna use a jointer to square off all the edges of my 2x4s that I'm gonna be using for the legs and the stretchers of the project. This is really an optional step. It's not really necessary. If you don't have one, no big deal. And if you did want to get that squared off look, you could still do that with a circular saw, a table saw. There's lots of different ways to do it, but I have a jointer, so that's what I'm going to use. And now we're going to cut the slats into the smaller pieces that are going to frame out the planter. And for that, I need to set up a stop block because I'm doing a whole bunch of repetitive cuts. So this will make sure that all the sizes are consistent. Now I'm sure there's a better way to do this, but I've laid out where I'm gonna be putting all the slats on my stretchers and I'm marking them with a pencil just because this is the easiest way for me to do it. And then it's as simple as lining up the boards and transferring the mark to the other stretcher so that everything's consistent. And now it's time to get to work drilling the pocket holes, as I'm sure you guessed. And I've got 32 of these to do. So I'm gonna get to work. And I'm actually going to use pocket holes to connect the stretchers to the legs. So I'm going to kind of very carefully line up the pocket hole. It's gonna cross another pocket hole, but it won't get in the way, so we should be good. This is kind of what it looks like. Now for building the legs, I'm gonna take my longer pieces and I'm gonna countersink using a 3/8 inch bit. That's gonna be important in a minute. And then I'm gonna pre-drill with a smaller bit for the screws. I always pre-drill because I don't want my wood to split. Then it's as simple as just screwing it all together. And when that's all done, this is where that 3/8 inch bit was important because I'm actually gonna plug those with 3/8 inch dowel that I cut into small sections with some wood glue. Stick that in there, let it dry. Then I'm gonna come in with my flush cut saw once the wood glue's dried and just cut off the excess. And of course, this isn't a woodworking project if it doesn't involve sanding. So originally I was gonna paint the legs black, and then when I was driving to Home Depot, my wife was like, why don't you stain them? It's like, you know what? That's a good idea. Paint is the wrong choice. However, stain is also the wrong choice. This needs fire. So I actually discovered this technique online where you take a blowtorch of some sort. I've got like a large blowtorch. And you just char the wood. And you're not trying to burn it down, you're just trying to give it a nice even char through the whole surface layer of the wood. And once it's cooled off, you just use a wire brush to clean off the excess soot, and it gives it just a perfect deep brown tone. And now that those are all cleaned off, I'm going to assemble the frame. I'm going to be connecting the stretchers and the supports to the legs using the pocket hole screws. And with the whole frame assembled, I'm gonna use boiled linseed oil for 2 reasons. 1, it's gonna help with the longevity of the project. And number 2, it looks cool. From far away, it's gonna look black, but up close, it's got this really, really rich brown color. And while that's drying, I'm gonna turn my attention back to sanding. I'm gonna sand all of the wood slats, all 30 of them, the small ones, the long ones, all of them. And for my slats, I really don't want them to get too yellow of a color or an orange color. I want them to stay as natural as I can keep it. So I'm gonna use this, this spray called Spar Urethane. You can get it in a can that you apply with a brush, but the spray is the fastest. I want to knock this project out as quick as I can. So I'm using a spray. This stuff is fantastic. I'm gonna link it in the description below along with all the other products that I'm using. But if you're looking to keep as natural of a color while keeping the wood protected from the elements, this has been the best that I've found so far. It does have some yellowing to it, but it's the most natural that I've found. So I did 3 coats of that spray, and on the final coat while it's drying, I'm over here marking the pocket hole locations on the stretchers with some painter's tape on the front side of the stretcher, just for the ease of installation. It's gonna help me with lining up the boards a little bit easier. And here we go with installing the slats with the pocket holes on the back side of the stretcher. Now while I'm doing this, let me just explain one quick thing. Yes, I used a 1/2-inch piece of plywood to figure out all the spacing for the slats. However, it was not exactly perfect with the measurements. So I did want the end pieces to line up perfectly along the seam of the leg to the stretcher. So the middle, I actually finagled the spacing just a little bit to make it all look cohesive visually. Nobody's ever gonna be able to tell that they're slightly less than 1/2 inch towards the middle of the project. So, lesson learned, you gotta tweak some things once in a while. It'll be okay. Nobody's gonna know the difference except you, me, and anybody else who's watching this video. Now on the back side, I'm gonna do the same countersink and pre-drilling that I had done earlier when I assembled the legs. I'm doing this because I don't want to split the wood. I'm using 1¼ inch screws to connect everything down here. And this will basically be hidden, so I don't need to do the plugs like I did the last time. This is just gonna be open holes on the back underside of the table that nobody will ever see. Now for the 2 end pieces, they are attached directly to the legs, which means there's no pocket hole screws for it. It's countersunk and pre-drill. But the spacing is limited in there to get a drill, so I ended up using a 90-degree angle attachment to be able to fit in that space properly for the drilling, as well as using it to screw in the screws. And with the table all built and done, I'm gonna turn my attention to the star of the show, the planter box. And for this, I'm just using a redwood fence picket that I picked up from Home Depot. And I'm gonna cut it down to the lengths that I need. And then for the width, I want it to be 3.5 inches deep, just like a 2x4. So I use that as a template to cut the width with my circular saw. And with all my pieces cut, I'm gonna assemble it, just making sure that all my corners are square. I pre-drill and then screw all the pieces together. All right, so I got the box for the planter all built. I did the same thing with the fire and the linseed oil to the box just because I think it's gonna hide it better when it's installed. But in any case, so there's, at the bottom, there's actually a seam right here that's gonna act as drainage for me. So this works out perfectly. But for that, because I don't want any soil to come through that crack, I'm just gonna use some weed barrier. I have a ton of this stuff left over from previous projects, so I just cut off a piece, then I'm gonna cut it to fit at the bottom. Just because it's porous, it'll let the water drain out, but it'll hold the soil intact, so yeah. And with the box all put in place, 4 screws, and we're done. So let's be real for a second. The coolest part of this entire build is the fact that there is a planter in the middle of this coffee table. I love the concept, I love the execution, and I'm really excited to throw some plants in here, but I wanna make sure that they're gonna live. So I'm gonna put in succulents because they are definitely gonna be able to live outdoors, but I want them to live their best life. So I picked up a bag of this Miracle Gro cactus, palm, and citrus soil to plant the succulents in. And that last step is just feeding them. I just take my Miracle Gro succulent plant food, give a couple pumps in the water, and then water the succulents like I would water any other plant. Well, the table is built, it is done. A huge thank you to Home Depot and Scott's Miracle Gro for allowing me to build this project. I am officially ready for spring, getting ready for summer.